How have anthropologists engaged with issues of human ecology and sustainability? So this short video is meant to look at how anthropology's approach to sustainability and the environment has changed over time. We've always looked at the environment, but it began to be sort of a subtopic within cultural anthropology in about the 50s. And one of the first people to bring people together around this idea of, really looking at and focusing on developing theories about culture and the environment was an anthropologist named Julian Stewart, who was the main proponent of a field called cultural ecology. So this is back in the mid 20th century, and he looked at a people called the Shoshone, or who call themselves Niue, and I'm not sure about that pronunciation, but it's Newe. They live in what is now this called the state of Nevada. And what he looked at really was how the production of their food is the center point of their behavior in society. So cultural ecology really was about how the way people get their food, really creates social and cultural organization around it, including the power relations among people. Then a group of people started to look at what they called ecological anthropology. So it was very similar. And a lot of times these groups start up just because they're somewhat different from their predecessors, but they'd like to, denote their differences. So they said, now we're ecological anthropologists. But still in ecological anthropology, there was a focus on how food getting practices affect the social and cultural life of a group. This one focused on an idea called the systems theory. And systems theory is an idea about sort of a closed loop system where any group, let's say a group of people who are living in the rainforest, they have developed their cultural and social calendar, behaviors, values around what is going to be available in their environment or what they can make available in their environment in sort of a closed loop system, right? So sort of like looking at a zero sum game or a pie, right? Where if you take something from one side, you're going to have to replace it with something else. And a good example of this is Roy Rappaport's study among a group of people in Papua New Guinea called the Tsembaga Maring. And what they would do every year is they had a sort of an annual cycle of raiding and war that the men would participate in. So at this time, the men would need a lot of protein for strength. And what Rappaport noticed was a huge culling of pigs, like a major slaughtering event that coincided right before this annual cycle of war. And so he explained this as a closed loop. So they went out and slaughtered a bunch of pigs, which brought down the number of pigs in the environment, which could also have, good effects in terms of like the pigs not eating the same foods that people need. And then they would have all of this meat stored for protein to use when the annual cycle of fighting came up. So this didn't last for very long because it's a very formulaic way to look at people, and people are not very formulaic, right? People have symbols and all kinds of different decision making processes that don't always just have to do with what's available and what's not. I mean, think about someone who lives in the United States and has all kinds of opportunities to eat anything they want, but chooses to be a vegan, for instance, right? So we do things for reasons other than just availability or just because the resources are there. So political anthropology developed a little bit later, and these are folks who are really interested in the relationship between food and the environment and power. Who controls the resources, right? How are people's resources limited because of power relations? So really, anytime you see the word political, you know it's going to be about power and control. So that would be, you know, for instance, a political ecologist might study the case of Coca-Cola in Bolivia and the bottling of their water there. And then today we use the term environmental anthropology. It's a very broad term and it can encompass lots of things. But you know, often people who are interested in these same sorts of topics, right? How do people interact with their environment? How are they being limited by their environment? I've got a couple of pictures here. One is of some Inuit people, modern day Inuit people who are fishing. They're ice fishing. And I think there's an anthropologist in there who's learning to ice fish as well. And so, you know, how is that changing? How much of their food intake comes from traditional ways of getting food and how much comes from the 7-Eleven that's just popped up down the road. This other picture on the right, on the bottom, is of a girl playing in a logging camp. And I think this is in New Guinea, where you know, the places that are very forested are often used for logging, for cutting down trees and using those trees for products. And so environmental anthropologists today could look at, you know, how does this affect, how do these logging practices affect the people who live in this area? You know, is it, you know, making it easier for them to survive? Is it making it harder for them? Who chose to bring in the loggers? Where are they from? What kind of international systems is this impacting or influencing? So there's all kinds of interesting questions there.